Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. And this week I'm going to be doing my AAR of Mike Green's Green Ops Advanced Covert Carry Skills class. So I'm just going to jump right into it because I want to keep the video as short as possible, but I also want to make sure that I'm doing the appropriate deference to Mike and Rowdy with all their hard work, and I don't want to gloss over anything. So I always like to touch on what a class is and what a class isn't, just to kind of set the expectation for anybody that's looking at it. What this class isn't, it's definitely not an introductory class. You need to have at least kind of a baseline of gun handling because of some of the stuff that we end up doing. Mike requires at least a C-level classification or proof of completion of an acceptable entry-level pistol class. And he's not trying to be snobby about it or keep people out, but the reality is that when you start doing stuff at speed, or when you start kind of introducing more complex tasks into firearms handling, that is when safety issues can arise if you really don't have that good baseline gun handling cemented in firmly. So that's kind of the reason for that. If you're new to this, don't let it turn you off. It's just kind of the necessary consideration to make sure that everybody is appropriately safe. The second thing that it isn't is it's not going to be like a spin-up for Special Forces selection or anything like that. You're not going to be running around doing push-ups, getting yelled at, or any of that jazz. It really is just there. What it is, it's a shooting mechanics class, and Mike has found a wonderfully sneaky way to get people to sign up for that. And I, as a marketing major, I have to give him some very strong kudos there, because Advanced Covert Carry is a wonderfully sexy class name, because if it was just titled Shooting Mechanics, I don't necessarily think he would have the enrollment that he does on it. And I mean that in the best possible sense, because I got a ton out of this class. Day one started with about a 30-minute introduction and kind of classroom portion where Mike decided to go over some of his relevant professional experience working overseas, plain clothes. One of the things that I really appreciate that he does is he's very specific in the language that he chooses in terms of delineating between low visibility, concealed, and covert. The main difference between them being, the severity of consequence that you would suffer if you were to be discovered as being armed. And in the civilian context, a lot of us, some people live in the low visibility, which I don't think is appropriate at all. Most folks are in the concealed arena, but I think a lot of us could definitely benefit from shifting over and actually doing more focused attention on trying to be as covert as possible. It makes things, it reduces social friction. It can kind of help in terms of if you are being profiled for criminal violence, you are not overplaying your hand. If you're familiar with Varg Freeborn's work, you kind of know what I'm talking about there. But I really appreciate the delineation that he draws there. There was some conversation on gear, as well as a few stories that were some of his methods that were used. A lot of focus, interestingly enough, on kind of the social fluency that I talk about in terms of making sure that how you present yourself, both in terms of how you behave and how you dress, are appropriate for the environment in which you're going to be, so that way you're not drawing any unnecessary scrutiny. Basically, it's just acting like you've been there before. So it was interesting. Some success stories, a couple things where he wound up getting made. Thankfully, nothing that was catastrophic, but a couple things that kind of bit him in the ass that turned into learning opportunities. So the lecture portion was immensely helpful from that standpoint. Then we headed out to the range. Medical briefing, which I think is essential for any live fire class. If you're at a live fire class and they don't have a medical brief, that's a big red flag for me. So that's kind of how that started. Now, Once we got into the actual live fire portion, it started off with dot torture at 3 yards, and that was the evaluation tool, just so that way that Mike and his AI Rowdy could kind of gauge the ability level of everybody. They went into some of the basics in terms of loading procedures and post-shooting scan and assessment, and the why behind their procedures. Really, more than anything, the focus of it was consistency. You just want to make sure that you're doing it the same way every single time, so that way it is just part of the whole routine. Nothing gets overlooked accidentally. We started going into some draw to first shot and then some controlled pairs. What I really appreciated on day one, especially the first half of it, the two big focuses were in terms of really getting a feel for your trigger, as well as understanding what your sight picture is, and in terms of what your sight picture needs to be to get the desired hits that you need. So there's a lot of focus on acceptable accuracy. The term combat accuracy gets bandied about quite a bit, and usually it is by people that are trying to excuse shotgun style patterns on, full silhouettes at 5 yards. For our purposes, we were shooting IDPA targets, and the A zone was the acceptable scoring zone. Anything outside of that was kind of the no-go. So as long as you were able to keep everything in the A zone, you were good to go. That was, for our purposes, combat acceptable accuracy. And so we then, when it comes to seeing what you need to see, did that at various distance to get a feel for what that sight picture and what that trigger manipulation looks and feels like, so that way you're not taking too much time up close and you are taking enough time for the back. Once we came back from lunch, we started drilling down a little bit more on the trigger manipulations, and then something that I don't recall experiencing in a live fire class before. I may be misremembering, but there was never, I don't remember ever there being kind of an appreciable dedicated block of dry fire. Now, I'm sure part of that is just the fact that, in 2021, ammunition is unobtainium. So Mike certainly was accommodating in that regard to try and keep the round count as low as possible while still getting enough mileage out of it. But the exercise that I found interesting was we were actually doing draw to first trigger press, and the par time was brought down to a half a second. The interesting thing, though, was that with the exception of maybe the top 2 or 3 shooters in the class, after no more than 20 minutes of that, and that, probably a lot less than that, that dry exercise knocked a half a second off of everybody's draw to first shot. So that was definitely an eye-opening experience there. Then we started going into some one-handed, both drawing and loading procedures, as well as some malfunction clearing. So what I liked about it is that there wasn't overemphasis on it. It was, hey, this is good to know, but incorporate it as you see fit. There was none of this, well, you got to do it this way or otherwise you get killed in the streets. There was emphasis on, hey, if you notice, a lot of best practices kind of look the same, and maybe that's a clue. So the one-handed stuff, we were doing one-handed draws, we were doing off-handed draws, as well as one-handed reloads. There were a couple different options that were explored for that. The most popular of which, both from Mike as well as for a majority of the students, is something that you may recognize. So the first day wrapped with basically a USPSA stage that Rowdy set up, which I thought was super cool, because that was my first real exposure to shooting a stage. I mean, I've seen them, I'm friends with enough competition shooters, but I've not really had the chance to shoot one myself. So I appreciated that because it kind of removed my hesitation and makes getting into competition a lot less daunting. When it comes to day 2, we started up again with dot torture. This time it was at 5 yards, and the interesting thing is that everybody's performance increased, even at the greater distance. And then we started getting into some positional shooting. So some of the mechanical considerations in terms of sitting, kneeling. There was a little bit of barricade work in there as well. Then we started getting into some movement, both front to back and laterally. So that really highlighted the necessity of the proper trigger manipulation and seeing only what you needed to see from the prior day's exercises. Then we started looking at some rotation, so turning left, right, and 180, as well as then we started looking at some target transitions. What I found interesting, I'd never heard of the Blake drill before, and it was very illuminating because, and this is not novel information for anybody that is a much more accomplished shooter than myself, but apparently whenever you're shooting like a 2-2-2, like the 3 abreast targets, like the El Prez is done, it's supposed, from my understanding now, it's supposed to be the same tempo that you shoot a bill drill. So it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Shooter ready? Stand by. Nice. All right. So we can look at. I'm just gonna level. Draw time. Remember, I need to go to be 167. 3-6. Your split. 3-5 transition. 3-6 split with the 4-9. So that last transition was the slowest one.
Okay.
But your splits and your transitions were very similar, and that's what we're looking for.
Got it.
The space between the shots your splits should be the same. So that was kind of a little illuminating moment for me. Then we started getting into a little bit more of the advanced stuff. So we were doing some barrel drills. We were doing some one-handed malfunction clearing and things like that. And then the second day capped off with the kind of the official shoot-off, which was the El Prez. I did okay. I posted that video, I think, last week. And, like I said, I did all right, especially for it being something that I don't practice at all. But my buddy Craig over at Templar Defense took the top shot for the class, which was, cool, good on you. So he got a patch for his efforts. So, overall, like I said, it was a great class. It was miserably cold. It didn't get over 30 degrees the entire damn weekend. I had a layer of ice on my ear pro. My collar was all kind of crusty, frozen. The weather was miserable. But, let's be honest. Nobody's going to be bitching to a Green Beret about training conditions. So we all kind of just sucked it up and dealt with it. The way I like to cap all of these off is with the short-barreled Shepherd's 333 model, because I think it really does highlight the most critical takeaways. So the 3 things that were most heavily focused on in the class were, number 1, speed, and not from a standpoint of you gotta have a sub-second draw, but more from a standpoint of if you have the ability to execute a sub-second draw, that then gives you more processing time, more decision-making time, and more options. So it certainly can't hurt. But it was not presented as the only necessary component either. The second thing that was focused on was, again, seeing what you need to see at the given distance to generate the desired hits. Because for me, I've got a real bad time over confirming my dot, where when I get it out there, I can feel it. It feels like probably a good half second between when I see the dot where I want it and breaking the shot. And so it's partially that, and partially the third element that was really most heavily focused on, which was getting as much slack out of the trigger as possible. The other place that I've heard this talked about in depth was Chuck Pressburg's flinchies video that he did with Surefire, where you want as much slack, you want 90% of it taken out, so that way when the dot's where you want it, the shot's just there to break. Something that still takes a little getting used to on my part. So those are kind of the three elements that are the top focus of the class. The three things that I took away are, number one, trying to go almost what seems like unrealistically fast, especially in dry practice, to try and get the hand speed where you want it. Now, I'm sure that the other folks that I've taken pistol classes with, if they watch this, are going to go, yeah, dummy, that's what I tried to teach you. But I guess I just never saw it demonstrated at what at first glance is such a laughably fast par time. But I mean, I'll be damned if it didn't have a huge impact. So the first takeaway is practicing faster. The other is I developed a real appreciation for truly how much support hand grip is critical, because when the air temperature was 27 degrees and with the wind chill it felt like 14, couldn't feel individual fingers for the most part. So just literally just monkey grabbing, with the support hand to try and hold everything in place. It weirdly enough, it helped my shooting. I'm not ever going to advise anybody to try and shoot in offensively cold weather, but it definitely highlighted the importance of the support hand grip for me. And then the third thing that I took away from it is evidently I've got a pretty good handle on the concealment aspect of it. Because I'm certainly not going to sit here and say that I know as much as somebody like Mike Green, because that's not the case in the slightest. But when it comes to the discrete wardrobe considerations of it, a lot of it felt very familiar. I'll say it that way. And I think it just kind of goes back to what he talked about in the class, where when it comes to best practices, people that are completely dissociated from one another are likely going to come to similar conclusions if it's what works. So the fact that I managed to come to a few of those conclusions kind of on my own is I guess, encouraging, to say the least. The three things that I'm going to be doing differently are, number one, I am definitely incorporating that half-second par into my dry practice. And basically the litmus test, or the guide that he uses, is whatever you want your live performance to be, the dry par should be half that. The second is that I am going to continue to work on not over-confirming my dot. And I'm going to cheat here because it's going to be kind of a two-piece. That's going to be not over-confirming the dot, as well as working the trigger prep into that, so that way when the dot is where I want it, it's just the shot is breaking. And the third is I am going to get into competition as soon as I reasonably can, because I see a ton of value in it, even after that just brief exposure. So again, I know that this was a bit of a longer video. I appreciate everybody sticking with me through it. I really hope you found this useful. If you have the opportunity to take this class, I literally cannot recommend it enough. Like I said, there were no earth-shattering revelations for me, but it just contextualized and presented stuff in a fashion that really just kind of helped all the past lessons that I've had click into place a little bit better. And it's one of the few classes that, walking away, I had a much stronger grasp on what specifically I needed to practice after the fact. So that I found incredibly helpful as well. So hope everybody is staying safe, And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe, share it around. That obviously helps me out a ton. And if you like this kind of stuff, stay tuned. We got more of it. Everybody have a great week and stay sharp.